Alien King challenged a human janitor to spar. For fun, what happened next left everyone speechless. The scrub brush trembled in Mara's calloused hands as the thunderous roar of alien laughter shook the crystal chandeliers above. 23 years old, bone-thin from too many skipped meals, she kept her head down and focused on the stubborn wine stain bleeding across the marble floor like spilled blood. Just invisible. Just another shadow in the corners of the galactic palace. "Keep scrubbing, human!" sneered a passing Zorathian guard, his 6 eyes glowing amber in the dim light. "The king's guests don't want to smell your kind tonight." Mara bit her tongue until she tasted copper. 3 jobs. 14-hour days. Also, her twin siblings could eat something other than the protein paste ration to the human districts. The Zorathian Empire had conquered Earth 15 years ago, turning major cities into labor camps, and the remaining free zones into dystopian wastelands. Most Americans had either died in the initial invasion or been relocated to work colonies. The lucky ones, like Mara, found menial jobs serving their alien overlords. She scrubbed harder, her reflection wavering in the polished stone, stringy blonde hair escaping from her regulation ponytail, pale skin marked by exhaustion, green eyes that had once sparkled with dreams now dulled by reality. The scar on her knuckle, a memento from her father's last training session before the invasion, caught the light. "Remember, Mara?" His voice echoed in her memory. "A true warrior strikes not with anger, but with purpose." Fat chance she'd ever need those lessons now. The great hall erupted in another wave of alien cheers. Through the servants' entrance, Mara glimpsed the spectacle beyond. Hundreds of Zorathian nobles seated at floating tables, their scaled skins shimmering under bioluminescent decorations. At the head table, King Thaler himself presided over the festivities, his massive frame draped in ceremonial armor that caught the light like liquid mercury. 8 feet tall with skin like polished obsidian, he commanded attention even while seated. His 4 arms gestured gracefully as he spoke, each movement calculated and powerful. "The entertainment begins," announced General Vex, his voice amplified through the hall's acoustics. "Tonight, our finest warriors demonstrate the combat superiority that brought the galaxy to its knees." Mara tried to focus on her work, but the commotion was impossible to ignore. 2 elite Zorathian fighters entered the makeshift arena at the hall's center, their movements fluid and predatory. The crowd's excitement reached fever pitch as they circled each other, displaying techniques that could shatter human bones like twigs. "You there!" A rough hand grabbed Mara's shoulder, yanking her to her feet. She found herself face to face with Commander Zek, the palace's head of security. His scarred face twisted with impatience. "The performers are late. Get to the preparation room, now!" "I'm sorry, sir, but I'm just..." "Move!" He shoved her toward a side door, mistaking her cleaning uniform for the simple garb worn by entertainment staff. In the chaos of preparation, with dozens of aliens rushing about, no one questioned a human being pushed around. The preparation room buzzed with activity. Alien attendants thrust weapons into her hands, practice blades, thankfully, but still deadly looking. Someone stripped off her apron and threw a combat vest over her uniform. The vest, designed for aliens, hung loose on her small frame. "Wait, please, I think there's been a mistake," Mara began, but her words were lost in the crowd's roar as the main event concluded. "Next fighters, to the arena!" boomed the announcer. Before she could protest further, Mara was pushed into the blinding spotlights of the great hall. The crowd's noise hit her like a physical force. Hundreds of alien eyes focused on her with predatory interest. She stood frozen, a deer caught in headlights, clutching the practice sword like a lifeline. Then came the silence. It spread like ripples across the hall as the aliens realized what they were seeing, a human in their sacred combat arena. Whispers hissed through the crowd like steam from a kettle. "Is that a human? How dare they mock our traditions? Kill it!" King Thalas' voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "What is the meaning of this?" Commander Zek stepped forward, his face pale. "My king, there was a scheduling error. I can remove the human immediately." "No," Thalas' voice carried a note of dark amusement. He rose from his throne, towering over his guests. This is interesting. A human wishes to demonstrate combat prowess before the Zorathian Empire? His laugh was like distant thunder. Very well. I accept this challenge. The hall exploded in shocked murmurs. No human had ever faced a Zorathian in single combat, not officially, not as sport. It was suicide. Mara's legs nearly gave out. Your Majesty, please, I'm not afraid? Valor descended the steps with predatory grace, each footfall echoing through the suddenly quiet hall. How disappointing! And here I thought humans possessed courage. Something in his tone, mockery mixed with dismissal, ignited a spark in Mara's chest. The same spark her father had warned her about, the one that got humans killed in this new world. But exhaustion and stress had worn her defenses thin. I'm not afraid, she heard herself say, raising the practiced sword with shaking hands. I just don't want to embarrass you in front of your guests. The hall went silent. Even the king paused, surprise flickering across his angular features. Then his laugh boomed through the space, rich and genuinely amused. Unexpected. Very well, little human. Let us see what you can do. He moved like lightning. One moment he was 10 feet away, the next his own practiced blade was slicing toward her head. Mara's body reacted before her mind could catch up, her father's training taking over as she dropped into a defensive crouch, angling her blade to deflect the strike while stepping inside his reach. The impact sent shockwaves up her arm, but she held. More importantly, her counterstrike, a quick, precise thrust toward his center mass, connected with his armor, not hard enough to damage but enough to make him stagger backward. The hall erupted in gasps. King Thela looked down at his chest, where the tip of her blade had touched, then back at Mara with something that might have been respect. Impossible, whispered someone in the crowd. Mara stood frozen, the practiced sword suddenly feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. What had she just done? The silence stretched like a held breath. King Thela's 4 eyes studied Mara with an intensity that made her skin crawl, but it wasn't the predatory look she'd expected. It was something else, recognition mixed with impossible disbelief. The crescent moon stance, he whispered, so quietly only she could hear. Followed by the whisper strike. His voice carried a tremor that seemed alien coming from someone so powerful. Where did you learn that? Mara's heart hammered against her ribs. I don't know what you're talking about. She tried to step backward, but her legs felt like jelly. My father just taught me some basic moves before. Silence. Thala's command wasn't harsh, but it froze her mid-sentence. His gaze swept over her stance, the way she held the blade, even how she positioned her feet. Show me the third form. I don't know any forms. Mara's voice cracked. I just moved. I was scared. But even as she spoke, her body seemed to remember something her mind didn't. Her feet shifted automatically, blade angling at precisely 45 degrees, weight distributed in a way that felt as natural as breathing. The crowd murmured, but their voices sounded distant, underwater. General Vex leaned forward in his seat, his scarred face pale. My king, he called out, his voice carefully neutral. Perhaps this entertainment has gone on long enough. Thala didn't respond. He was still staring at Mara like she was a ghost made flesh. The Orathian blades, he breathed, and the name hit the assembled nobles like a thunderclap. Conversation stopped mid-word. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Even the servants along the walls went rigid with shock. Mara had never heard the name before, but the reaction it generated made her stomach drop. What? What are the Orathian blades? Impossible, hissed General Crix from the high table, his 6 arms tensing. The Orathians were eliminated 30 years ago. Every last one of them. Every warrior, yes, Thalas said slowly, still not taking his eyes off Mara. But if someone survived? If they had children? He trailed off, the implications hanging heavy in the air. Whispers erupted throughout the hall like wildfire. She could be one of them. The rebellion technique. If others are still alive, this changes everything. General Vex stood abruptly, his hand moving to his weapon. My king, with respect, we cannot allow a word of this to leave this hall. The political ramifications are mine to consider. Thaler cut him off, but Mara caught the sharp looks exchanged between several generals. Looks that made her blood run cold. She was in more danger than she'd realized, and she didn't even understand why. I don't know anything about any Orathians, she said desperately, backing toward the edge of the arena. I'm just a janitor. I clean floors and empty trash and carried the genetic memory of the greatest warrior clan in galactic history, Thaler finished. A clan that once brought entire star systems to their knees. A clan that nearly toppled the Zorathian Empire before they were stopped. Mara's legs finally gave out, and she sank to her knees. The practice sword clattered to the floor. I don't understand any of this. Please, I just want to go home to my siblings. Something flickered across Thaler's face, an emotion she couldn't identify. Home. He repeated the word like it was foreign to him. Then, louder, addressing the crowd. The human will be taken to my private chambers for interrogation. The hall erupted in surprised murmurs. General Vex stepped forward. Your Majesty, surely the dungeons would be more appropriate. I said my chambers. Thaler's voice brooked no argument. I will question her myself about any remaining Orathian survivors. And if she refuses to talk? Asked General Crix, his tone suggesting he had several creative solutions in mind. Then I will make her talk. Thaler's smile was sharp enough to cut glass, but when he looked down at Mara, she caught something else in his expression. Something that almost looked like protection? 2 royal guards stepped forward to flank her. Mara scrambled to her feet, terror making her movements clumsy. Please, Your Majesty, I don't know anything. My father died in the invasion 15 years ago. He was just a construction worker. Construction workers, Thaler said softly, don't usually train their daughters in combat techniques that were classified at the highest levels of galactic security. As the guards escorted her from the arena, Mara caught fragments of hurried conversations from the noble tables. Cannot let this information spread. If there are others, eliminate the problem before coup opportunity. The words followed her like predators as she was led through gilded corridors she'd only cleaned, never walked as anything but invisible help. Every step took her further from the world she knew and deeper into something that felt like a nightmare. Behind them, she could hear General Vex addressing the crowd. My lords and ladies, what transpired here tonight must remain within these walls until the king has completed his investigation. But Mara heard the underlying message in his tone, and it chilled her more than the marble floor had under her knees. This wasn't about investigation. This was about survival. Hers and maybe everyone who'd witnessed what just happened. As the massive doors to the king's private wing closed behind them, Mara realized with crystal clarity that her life, whatever it had been just an hour ago, was over. The king's private chambers were nothing like Mara had imagined. She'd expected dungeon walls and torture devices, but instead found herself in what looked almost like a library. Holographic star charts rotated slowly above an obsidian desk, while the walls displayed artifacts from dozens of conquered worlds, Earth included. Her breath caught when she spotted a faded American flag mounted behind protective glass, like a museum piece from a dead civilization. Thaler dismissed the guards with a wave. The massive doors sealed shut with a soft hiss, leaving them alone. For a moment, he simply stood there, studying her with those 4 unsettling eyes. Then, to her complete shock, his shoulders sagged slightly and he sank into a chair that adjusted automatically to his massive frame. Sit, he said, gesturing to a smaller chair across from him. His voice had lost its commanding edge, replaced by something that sounded almost tired. Mara remained standing, every muscle coiled for flight. Are you going to kill me? If I wanted you dead, you would have died in the arena. He leaned back, removing his ceremonial crown and setting it aside. Without it, he looked less like a terrifying alien emperor and more like someone carrying an enormous burden. Tell me about your father. Why? Because his basic self-defense training just demonstrated combat techniques that have been lost for 3 decades. Thaler's tone was patient, but she heard the steel underneath. "Tell me about him, Mara." The use of her name startled her. She'd never given it to him. "How do you? Your employment records. I know everything about you, or thought I did. 23 years old. Parents died in the invasion. Twin siblings, Danny and Sarah, aged 12. You work 3 jobs to keep them fed and in school." His expression softened almost imperceptibly. "You're trying to take care of your family. I understand that." Something in his tone made her sink into the chair despite herself. Dad was just Dad. He worked construction before the invasion. He used to teach me and the twins little things, how to throw a punch, how to fall without getting hurt, basic stuff. Basic stuff. Dallas' laugh was humorless. "Show me how he taught you to stand when facing an opponent." Mara hesitated, then rose and fell into the stance without thinking. Her feet planted shoulder-width apart, weight on the balls of her feet, hands positioned in a way that felt completely natural. Valor went very still. "And how to breathe during combat?" 3 short breaths, 1 long one. "It helps you stay calm." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "The serene warrior technique." Thalos stood abruptly, beginning to pace. "Do you know what the Orathian blades were, Mara?" "No. They were the most elite fighting force in galactic history. Not just warriors, philosophers, strategists, guardians of peace. Each one could take down a dozen regular soldiers without breaking a sweat." His 4 hands clenched into fists. "They believed in balance, in protecting the innocent. They were honorable." "What happened to them?" Thalos' expression darkened. "The Zorathian Empire happened. My father's empire. 30 years ago, the Orathians stood against our expansion, protected worlds that couldn't protect themselves. So we eliminated them. Every warrior, every teacher, every child old enough to hold a blade. The room seemed to shrink around them. That's genocide." "Yes." The single word held a weight of regret that surprised her. "It was deemed necessary for galactic stability. I was young then, not yet king. I believed what I was told, that they were terrorists, threats to peace. And now? Now I wonder if we destroyed the wrong people." He stopped pacing and looked directly at her. "Your father wasn't a construction worker, Mara. Or if he was, it wasn't his only profession. The techniques he taught you, the way you move, it's pure Orathian. Which means either he was one of them, or he was trained by one of them." Mara felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "That's impossible. Dad was just. He was just Dad. He made pancakes on Sundays and helped with homework and taught his daughter how to survive in a universe that had already marked her for death." Thalos' voice was gentle, but his words hit like hammer blows. "Someone hid you, Mara. Someone took an enormous risk to keep you safe, to keep your heritage secret. But I don't know anything. I'm nobody. You're living proof that the Orathian bloodline survived. In the right hands, that knowledge could destabilize the entire empire." Outside the chamber, footsteps echoed in the corridor. Thalos had snapped toward the door, his warrior instincts suddenly alert. "Cannot allow this to continue," came General Vex's voice, barely audible through the thick walls. "The girl must be eliminated before word spreads," replied another voice, General Crix. "If other survivors learn of her existence." "And what of Thaler?" A third voice, one Mara didn't recognize. "His protection of the humans shows weakness. The other sector commanders are already questioning his leadership." Thaler moved to the door with fluid grace, pressing his ear against the metal. His expression grew darker with each word. "Perhaps," came Vex's voice again, "this crisis presents an opportunity. Remove the girl, claim she died during interrogation. The king's failure to extract information could be seen as problematic." "You're suggesting treason," said the third voice, but there was interest in it. "I'm suggesting the Empire needs strong leadership. Leadership that won't be swayed by sentiment toward inferior species." Mara watched Thalos' face transform, the tired ruler disappearing behind the mask of a predator. When he turned back to her, his eyes burned with cold fire. "It seems," he said quietly, We're both in more danger than I realized. The plotting voices faded as the generals moved away, but their words hung in the air like poison. Mara looked up at this alien king, this being whose people had destroyed her world, and realized with stunning clarity that he might be the only thing standing between her and death. The irony was almost funny. Almost. Captain Zara. Thalla's voice boomed through the chamber's communication system. Within moments, the door slid open to reveal a female Zorathian warrior, smaller than the male guards but radiating lethal competence. Her silver-scaled skin bore the intricate scars of a veteran fighter, and her 3 eyes assessed Mara with professional interest. "My king," she bowed formally. "The human has proven uncooperative during interrogation," Thalla said, his voice carrying perfectly to anyone who might be listening. "She requires constant supervision. I'm assigning her to your personal custody until she provides the information I require." Captain Zara's expression didn't change, but Mara caught a flicker of surprise in her gaze. "Understood, Your Majesty. Standard detention protocols? Modified protocols? She is to be housed in the guest quarters of the East Wing. Guard her personally. I want no accidents." The emphasis on the last word made Zara straighten. "The East Wing, my king?" Even Zara couldn't hide her confusion. The East Wing housed diplomatic visitors and honored guests, not prisoners. Did I stutter, Captain? "Of course not, Your Majesty." "Come, human." Zara gestured sharply for Mara to follow. As they left the chamber, Mara heard Thalla add in a voice that carried down the corridor, "Captain, ensure our guest understands the consequences of attempting to leave the palace grounds. My patience has limits." The guest quarters were a gilded cage, luxurious by any standard, with flowing fabrics, a bed softer than anything Mara had ever touched, and a window overlooking the palace gardens. But the door locked from the outside, and Captain Zara positioned herself just beyond it like a living barrier. For 3 days, Mara played the part of a terrified prisoner, while her mind raced with plans. Every conversation with Zara was stilted, professional. Every meal delivered by silent servants felt like a last request. She was trapped in a world she didn't understand, surrounded by beings who had conquered her people, protected by someone whose motives remained completely unclear. On the 4th night, desperation won over caution. The window in her room faced the eastern gardens, where the security lighting was minimal. Mara had spent hours studying the patrol patterns, timing the guards' movements. At 2 a.m., when the night shift was at its most relaxed, she made her move. The silk curtains tied together made a decent rope. Her father's training, whatever its true origin, had included basic climbing techniques. She lowered herself toward the ground, her heart hammering against her ribs with each careful movement. Her feet had barely touched the garden path when Captain Zara stepped out from behind a flowering shrub, arms crossed and expression thoroughly unimpressed. "Really?" Zara's voice was dry. "Curtain rope? That's the best you could manage?" Mara froze, caught between humiliation and terror. I just wanted to see my siblings. To tell them I'm okay. Your siblings received word 3 days ago that you're working extended shifts at the palace. They're fine." Zara's tone softened slightly. "Come. Back to your room." But as they walked back through the gardens, raised voices carried across the night air from an open window in the main palace. Mara slowed, recognizing General Vex's distinctive growl. "King grows more unstable by the day. This obsession with the human proves he's lost perspective." Zara tensed beside her, her hand moving instinctively toward her weapon. "The Outer Rim governors are already questioning his authority." Came another voice, General Crick's. "If we move quickly, we can present it as necessary action to preserve stability. And the human? Eliminated, obviously. Along with anyone who might have overheard her." Unique demonstration. Mara's blood turned to ice. They weren't just planning to kill her, they were planning to overthrow Thalla. "The coronation ceremony next week provides perfect cover," Vex continued. "All the sector commanders will be present. We stage an incident, claim the king was killed defending against a human terrorist plot. I assume leadership to maintain order. And if loyal forces resist? Then we remind them that resistance is treason. The casual brutality in Vex's voice made Mara's stomach churn. Captain Zara grabbed Mara's arm, pulling her quickly away from the window. They moved in tense silence back to the guest quarters, where Zara immediately activated a communication device. I need to speak with the king, she said tersely. Now. Thala arrived within minutes, still wearing sleeping robes that somehow made him look even more imposing. His 4 eyes were alert despite the late hour. Captain? The human overheard a conversation, my king. Between General Vex and others. Zara's voice was carefully neutral, but her posture screamed danger. Thala's gaze shifted to Mara, who stood pressed against the far wall like a cornered animal. What did you hear? They're planning to kill you, Mara blurted out. During some ceremony next week. They want to blame it on humans and take over. The room went silent. Thala studied her face with unnerving intensity, as if searching for deception. Finally, he spoke. You could have said nothing. Used the chaos to escape. Mara struggled to find words. I may not trust you, but those men want to hurt innocent people. That's not right. Something shifted in Thala's expression. For the first time since this nightmare began, he looked at her not like a political problem or a historical curiosity, but like a person who had made a choice, a brave one, despite her fear. Captain Zara, he said quietly, double the security around the human. And begin discreet surveillance on General Vex and his associates. Yes, my king. As Thala moved toward the door, he paused and looked back at Mara. You could have run. Why didn't you? Because someone has to do the right thing, she said simply. Even if they're scared. His smile was small but genuine. Your father taught you well, Mara. In more ways than 1 inch. After he left, Mara sank onto the bed, realizing that somewhere between terror and desperation, her relationship with the alien king had fundamentally changed. She still didn't trust him completely. But for the first time, she was beginning to understand him. The next morning brought an unexpected change. Instead of Captain Zara escorting Mara to meals, Thala himself appeared at her door, dressed not in ceremonial armor but in simple dark robes that made him look almost normal. If 8 feet of obsidian-scaled alien could ever be called normal. Walk with me, he said without preamble. Mara hesitated. Is this part of my interrogation? This is part of keeping you alive. His tone was matter-of-fact. General Vex has requested a private audience this afternoon. I suspect he wants to discuss your disposal. The safest place for you right now is beside me. They walked through corridors Mara had never seen, past windows that looked out over vast alien cities sprawling beyond the palace walls. The architecture was beautiful in its strangeness, organic curves that seemed to flow like water frozen in time. It wasn't always like this, Thala said quietly, noticing her gaze. Before the Empire expanded, Zorathian cities were small, peaceful. We were explorers, not conquerors. What changed? Thala was silent for so long that Mara thought he wouldn't answer. Then, fear. We discovered we weren't alone in the galaxy. Other species, some hostile. My grandfather believed the only way to ensure our survival was to control everything else first. And you? What do you believe? I believed what I was taught. Until recently. He paused beside a massive window overlooking the human districts far below, cramped buildings where people like her siblings lived on rations and hope. Tell me, Mara, what did your father say about the invasion? The question caught her off guard. He said sometimes good people make terrible choices because they're scared. That the real test of character is what you do when you realize you've made a mistake. Thala turned to study her with those unsettling 4 eyes. Wise man. He was. She felt the familiar ache of loss. He died protecting our neighborhood when your soldiers came through. Never fired a shot, just stood between them and the children. I'm sorry. The words were so soft, so unexpected, that Mara blinked in surprise. Why? Because I gave the order for that sweep. Sector 7, residential area, 15 years ago. I was told there were insurgent weapons caches hidden among the civilians. His voice carried the weight of old regret. We found children's toys and family photographs. They walked in heavy silence until they reached what appeared to be Thalla's private study. Unlike the formal chambers, this space felt lived in. Books and data tablets were scattered across surfaces, half-finished meals sat forgotten on side tables, and the air held the faint scent of something like coffee. This is where you really live, Mara observed. This is where I hide. Thalla moved to a wall display showing real-time reports from across the Empire. Flashing red indicators marked dozens of systems. Rebellion on Tau Ceti. Resource shortages in the Vega colonies. 3 sector governors requesting permission to pacify civilian populations. He turned the display off with a gesture that spoke of deep exhaustion. Every day, I make decisions that affect billions of lives. Every choice could mean the difference between peace and war, life and death. Mara found herself studying his profile, the sharp angles of his alien features, yes, but also the way his shoulders carried tension, how his hands clenched and unclenched unconsciously. It's too much for one person. That's what my advisors keep telling me. They suggest I delegate more authority to the generals. His laugh was bitter. Generals like Vex, who see genocide as an acceptable solution to political problems. So why don't you change things? Change? Thalla looked at her as if she'd suggested he sprout wings and fly. The Empire spans half the galaxy. Trillions of beings depend on the stability we provide. If I show weakness, if the central authority crumbles, the chaos could kill more people than any war. But if the central authority is built on oppression, then what's the alternative? His voice rose slightly, revealing the passion beneath his controlled exterior. Democracy? We tried that on 17 worlds. 8 fell to civil war within a decade. Anarchy? Religious extremism? Corporate oligarchy? He began pacing, his 4 hands gesturing as he spoke. I've studied every form of government in galactic history, Mara. They all have the same flaw. Which is? People. People are messy, unpredictable, selfish, short-sighted. He stopped pacing and looked directly at her. Present company accepted. Something in his tone made her pulse quicken. How do you know I'm any different? Because you warned me about the coup. Because you chose to protect people you don't even know instead of saving yourself. He moved closer, and she caught the scent of his alien cologne, something like cinnamon and ozone. Because you're standing here arguing political theory with someone who could have you executed with a word, and you're not afraid. I am afraid, she admitted softly. I'm terrified. But you're still here. The air between them seemed charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. Mara was acutely aware of how close he stood, of the alien warmth radiating from his massive frame. This was dangerous territory, not just politically, but personally. I should go, she said, backing toward the door. Mara, his voice stopped her. Thank you? For warning me. For making me remember that there are still people worth protecting in this galaxy. She looked back at him, this alien king who carried the weight of worlds, who had been raised to conquer but yearned for something better. You're not what I expected. Neither are you. The moment stretched between them, full of possibilities and dangers neither dared name. Then reality crashed back in as alarms began blaring throughout the palace. Emergency lockdown initiated, announced an automated voice. All personnel remain in current locations. Thalla's expression went cold and calculating. It begins. Through the study windows, they could see security forces mobilizing in the courtyards below. Whatever Vex and his conspirators had planned, they weren't waiting for the coronation ceremony. The coup had begun early. The alarms cut off abruptly, leaving an ominous silence in their wake. Thalla moved to his communication console, his 4 hands dancing over the holographic controls with practiced efficiency. Captain Zara, report, he commanded. Static answered him. Then, my king, there's been an incident. General Vex has called an emergency council session. He's demanding your immediate presence in the Grand Assembly. On what grounds? Security breach, Your Majesty. He claims there's been an attempt on your life. Mara felt ice water flood her veins. They're moving faster than we thought. Thalos' expression hardened into something that looked like carved stone. Indeed. Stay close to me. Whatever happens in that chamber, do not leave my side. The Grand Assembly was chaos barely contained within ceremonial walls. Hundreds of alien nobles, military commanders, and government officials filled the tiered seating, their voices creating a cacophony of fear and confusion. At the center of it all stood General Vex, his scarred face a mask of righteous indignation. Treachery that strikes at the very heart of our empire. He was declaring as Thaler and Mara entered. The crowd parted before them, but Mara noticed how many of the assembled aliens looked at her with open hostility. General! Thaler's voice cut through the noise like a blade. Explain this disruption. Vex turned with theatrical precision, his 6 eyes burning with manufactured outrage. My king, thank the stars you're safe. We've uncovered a plot against your life, one that reaches deeper than we ever imagined. Continue. The human terrorist, Vex pointed directly at Mara, has been using her access to your private chambers to gather intelligence for a coordinated assassination attempt. We found these in her quarters. 2 guards stepped forward, carrying what appeared to be weapons, human-made by the look of them. Old Earth military equipment that would have been impossible for someone like Mara to acquire. That's impossible, Mara said, stepping forward. I've never seen those before in my life. Silence! General Crix emerged from the crowd, his 4 arms spread in a gesture of authority. The evidence speaks for itself. Detailed palace schematics, guard rotation schedules, even blueprints of the king's private chambers, all found in the human's possession. More guards appeared, displaying holographic evidence that made Mara's heart sink. The documents looked authentic, right down to what appeared to be her own biometric signatures on the access logs. This is a frame-up, she said desperately, looking around the assembly. They're lying! Are we? Vex's smile was predatory. Then perhaps you can explain how you knew about our security protocols? How you managed to evade detection for days while gathering this intelligence? The crowd murmured, and Mara heard the shift in their mood. Fear was turning to anger, confusion to certainty. She was the perfect scapegoat, a human, an outsider, someone they were already predisposed to hate. My king! Called out Senator Thane from the upper tiers. Surely this proves what many of us have feared. Your attachment to this creature has clouded your judgment. Attachment? Thalas' voice was dangerously quiet. You've housed her in guest quarters instead of detention cells. Vex pressed, sensing momentum building. You've spent private time with her, walked with her through the palace. Some might say you've been compromised. The accusation hit the assembly like a lightning strike. Voices rose in shock and outrage. Compromised by a human? Unthinkable. The king's honor. Silence. Thalas' roar echoed through the chamber, his full 8-foot frame radiating authority. The crowd fell quiet, but the damage was done. Doubt had been planted, and it was spreading like wildfire. You dare question my loyalty to the Empire? Thalas' 4 eyes fixed on Vex with lethal intensity. Never, my king. But we question your judgment. Vex gestured to the assembled evidence. The facts are clear. This human has used your protection to gather intelligence for her terrorist cell. Even now, she could have Confederates preparing to strike. Where's your proof of this cell? Mara demanded. Where are these other conspirators? Dead, Crix said smoothly. We raided their safe house an hour ago. Unfortunately, they chose to fight rather than surrender. No survivors. It was brilliant, Mara had to admit. Clean, simple, impossible to disprove. They'd eliminated any potential witnesses and created a narrative that painted her as the sole surviving member of a terrorist plot. The evidence is fabricated, Thalas said flatly. My king! Senator Thane stood again, his voice carefully respectful but firm. With the greatest respect, that's exactly what we would expect you to say if you've been influenced. The word hung in the air like poison. Influenced. Compromised. Seduced by an enemy agent. Are you suggesting, Thalia said with deadly calm, that I am a traitor to my own empire? We're suggesting, Vex replied, that even the greatest leaders can be deceived. The human is clearly trained in psychological manipulation. The human has a name, Thalia interrupted. Marachin. And she is under my personal protection, the assembly erupted. Shouts of outrage, disbelief, and fear filled the air. Even some of Thalia's traditional allies looked shocked by his declaration. My king, pleaded General Torax, one of the older commanders. You cannot protect an enemy of the state. The law forbids it. The law serves the king, not the reverse. Thalia replied coldly. Not if the king has been compromised. Vex's voice rose above the chaos. My lords and ladies, we face a crisis unlike any in our history. Our sovereign has been manipulated by an enemy agent. For the good of the empire. For the good of your ambitions. Thalia cut him off. This entire charade is nothing more than a poorly orchestrated coup. The word hit the assembly like a physical blow. Coup. It was treason to even speak it in reference to the military command. My king, Vex said with wounded dignity, I am loyal to the empire above all else. If protecting that loyalty means relieving you of a burden that has clearly affected your judgment, then you declare yourself a traitor. Thalia's hand moved to his ceremonial sword. And I will deal with traitors as they deserve. The tension in the chamber reached a breaking point. Guards throughout the assembly shifted nervously, unsure which officers to obey. Senators and nobles looked between Thalia and his generals, calculating which side offered the best chance of survival. Mara stood frozen in the eye of the storm, realizing that her very existence had become the catalyst for civil war. The first blaster shot shattered the crystalline dome above the Grand Assembly, raining fragments of alien glass onto the panicking crowd below. General Vex's hand was still smoking from the discharge, his weapon aimed at the spot where Thalia had stood a heartbeat earlier. Protect the king! Captain Zara's voice cut through the chaos as she materialized beside Thalia, her own weapon drawn. But the chamber had erupted into complete pandemonium, nobles screaming and diving for cover while armed guards turned on each other, loyalty split between the crown and the rebellion. So much for subtlety, Thalia growled, drawing his ceremonial sword just as 3 rebel soldiers rushed their position. Mara watched in fascination and terror as the alien king moved. Every motion was precise, deadly, beautiful in its efficiency. His blade carved through the air like liquid mercury, deflecting blaster fire while his free hands grabbed weapons from fallen enemies. This was what a true warrior looked like. But even he couldn't be everywhere at once. Behind you! Mara screamed as she saw General Crix flanking them, a massive energy cannon charging in his forearms. Thalia spun, but too late. The blast would hit him before he could dodge. Without thinking, Mara threw herself between them, her body moving in patterns her father had drilled into her until they became muscle memory. The energy beam seared past her shoulder as she rolled, her hands finding a fallen guard's weapon. She'd never fired an alien blaster before, but desperation made her a quick learner. The return shot took Crix in the center of his armored chest, sending him crashing into a support pillar. Impossible, breathed Senator Thane, staring at Mara from his hiding place. No human could move that fast. His words were cut off as the chamber's main doors exploded inward. More rebel forces poured through the breach, not palace guards, but mercenaries in unmarked armor. Professional killers hired from the outer rim. Fall back to the throne dais, Thalia commanded, grabbing Mara's arm. We make our stand there. They fought their way through the chaos, Captain Zara and a handful of loyal guards forming a protective circle around them. Bodies littered the ornate floor, both alien and human staff who'd been caught in the crossfire. Mara saw a young cleaning girl, barely older than her siblings, crumpled behind an overturned table. Something cold and furious crystallized in her chest. You're killing innocents! She shouted at Vex, who was directing the assault from a defensive position near the chamber's rear. These people aren't soldiers. Casualties of war, Vex replied coldly, raising his weapon toward her. Starting with you, human terrorist. The blast never came. Captain Zara's return fire sent him diving for cover, but more mercenaries were pouring into the chamber. The loyal guards were outnumbered 3-1, their defensive circle shrinking with every passing second. "My king!" Zara called out, reloading her weapon with practiced speed. "We can't hold this position much longer." Thala looked around the ruined assembly, his nobles cowering behind whatever cover they could find, his empire tearing itself apart, his throne under siege from those sworn to protect it. For a moment, Mara saw something like despair flicker across his alien features. Then she saw his expression change as he looked at her. Not despair, resolve. "You're right, Captain. We can hold here." His voice carried new authority, cutting through the sound of battle. "But we don't need to hold. We need to advance." "Sir? The throne isn't a place to hide behind," Thala said, hefting his sword. "It's something worth fighting for." He looked directly at Mara. "Stay close. Trust your instincts." What followed was the most terrifying and exhilarating 5 minutes of Mara's life. Thala led their small group in a straight charge through the center of the chamber, his blade singing through the air as he cut down anyone who stood between him and General Vex. Mara found herself moving beside him, her father's training guiding her through combat that should have been impossible for a human janitor to survive. Duck, roll, strike. The energy blade in her hands felt natural, like an extension of her will. Parry, counter, advance. She was keeping pace with the warrior king and his elite guard, moving through battle like she'd been born to it. "The Orathian techniques," gasped one of the loyal guards, staring at her in amazement. "She fights like the legends." But it was when they reached Vex that everything changed. The general had taken position behind an energy shield, his weapon trained on Thala with cold calculation. "Surrender, my king. Your protection of this terrorist ends now." "She's not a terrorist," Thala replied, advancing steadily. "She's the proof that we were wrong. That the Orathians weren't our enemies. They were what we should have aspired to become. The Orathians were weak. Just like you've become." Vex's finger tightened on the trigger. Mara saw it happening as if in slow motion. The general's weapon charging, the aim shot that would take Thala in the heart, the split-second window where she could act. She didn't hesitate. Her blade intercepted the energy blast meant for Thala, deflecting it harmlessly into the ceiling. But the move left her overextended, vulnerable to Vex's follow-up shot. She never felt the second blast. Thala's sword took Vex's head from his shoulders in one clean strike, the general's weapon clattering to the floor unfired. The chamber fell silent except for the crackling of damaged electronics and the groans of the wounded. Slowly, nobles began to emerge from their hiding places, staring in shock at the scene before them. Mara stood beside Thala, breathing hard, very much alive and very clearly not a terrorist. The evidence of her loyalty was written in the smoking remains of the energy blast she'd deflected, a blast meant for their king. "My lords and ladies," Thala announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the ruined chamber. "I present Marachin. Not a terrorist. Not a threat. A hero who risked her life to save mine." The silence stretched. Then, slowly, Captain Zara began to applaud. The sound spread through the chamber like ripples on water until the entire assembly was cheering, not for the king's victory, but for the human who'd proven their preconceptions wrong. Thala looked down at Mara, and for the first time since this nightmare began, she saw him smile without reservation. "Welcome to politics," he said softly. "It's rarely this exciting." 3 days after the failed coup, the Grand Assembly had been restored to its former glory. The shattered dome had been replaced with reinforced crystal that caught the morning light like captured starfire, and fresh flowers from a dozen worlds decorated the tiered seating. But the most remarkable change wasn't in the architecture, it was in the faces of those gathered. For the first time in 15 years, humans sat among the alien nobles. Not as servants or prisoners, but as invited guests to witness something unprecedented in galactic history. Mara stood at the center of it all, wearing robes that Thala had commissioned specially for this occasion, not the simple garments of a servant, but the flowing ceremonial dress of someone being honored. The fabric shimmered with threads that seemed to capture and reflect light, and she'd never felt more simultaneously beautiful and terrified. Citizens of the Zorathian Empire! Thalas' voice resonated through the chamber, carrying to every corner and broadcasting across the galaxy through quantum relays. 3 days ago, this assembly was attacked by traitors who sought to use fear and prejudice to seize power. They failed, not because of superior military might, but because of the courage of one individual. He gestured toward Mara, and she felt the weight of countless alien eyes upon her. But also, scattered throughout the crowd, she saw familiar faces, her siblings Danny and Sarah in the front row, still wide-eyed with disbelief, and other humans from the districts, invited to witness this historic moment. Mara Chin, Thaler continued, is the daughter of James Chin, who died 15 years ago defending children during our occupation of Earth. She is also, we have discovered, the descendant of the Orathian Blade Warriors, a people we believed extinct, a culture we nearly destroyed in our ignorance. A ripple of whispers ran through the assembly. The story had spread despite attempts at secrecy, becoming legend even as it happened. The Orathians were not our enemies, Dallas said, his 4 eyes scanning the crowd with steady intensity. They were guardians, protectors of the innocent, warriors who fought not for conquest but for justice. In our fear, we destroyed them. In our arrogance, we believed this made us stronger. He turned to look directly at Mara, and she saw something in his expression that made her pulse quicken, not just respect or gratitude, but something deeper. Something that spoke of shared battles and quiet conversations, of trust built between 2 beings from different worlds who'd found common ground in the most unlikely circumstances. But one survived. Hidden, protected by parents who died to keep her safe. And when the moment came to choose between vengeance and justice, between hatred and hope, she chose to protect the life of her people's conqueror. His voice softened, meant for her alone despite the hundreds listening. She chose to save me, though I had done nothing to deserve such mercy. Your Majesty, Mara said softly, you saved me first. No, he replied, stepping down from the throne dais to stand beside her as an equal. You saved yourself? And in doing so, you saved all of us. He raised his voice to address the assembly again. By royal decree, the human sectors will be granted full citizenship rights within the Empire. The relocation camps will be dissolved. Earth will be restored to its people, with full autonomy under the Imperial Charter. The humans in the crowd gasped, some weeping openly. Danny and Sarah looked like they might faint from shock. But Mara barely heard the cheers erupting around her. She was focused entirely on Thalas' next words. Mara Chin, he said formally, you have proven that wisdom can come from the most unexpected places, that strength is found not in domination but in mercy. I offer you a choice. Here it was. The moment that would determine the rest of her life. You may return to Earth, to your family and your people, with my guarantee of safety and prosperity. You've earned the right to live peacefully, free from the politics and dangers of empire. Mara looked out at her siblings, at the other humans whose lives had just been transformed. She could have that, the simple life she dreamed of, the ability to raise Danny and Sarah without fear, without struggle. Or, Thaler continued, and his voice dropped to something more personal. You may remain here. As my advisor. As someone who can help guide the Empire towards something better than it has been. He paused, and when he spoke again, his words were meant for her alone despite the listening crowd. As someone who has already changed my understanding of what leadership truly means. The choice hung in the air between them. Safety or uncertainty. The known or the unknown. A quiet life or a chance to reshape the galaxy. Mara thought of her father, of his lessons about courage and doing the right thing even when it was terrifying. She thought of the cleaning girl who died in the crossfire, of all the people across the Empire who needed someone to speak for them. Most of all, she thought of the alien king who'd learned to see past his own prejudices, who'd chosen to protect her when it would have been easier to sacrifice her. I choose to stay, she said clearly, her voice carrying across the silent assembly. The cheers that erupted were deafening, but Mara barely heard them. She was looking at Thalas' face as relief and something deeper, something that might have been love, flickered across his alien features. Later, after the ceremonies and speeches, after Danny and Sarah had been settled into new quarters and the last of the diplomatic meetings had ended, Mara and Thala walked together through the palace gardens under twin moons. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. "Ask me again in a few years," she replied, then smiled up at him. "Though I should warn you, humans can be very stubborn about changing things they think are wrong. I'm counting on it," he said, and reached down to take her hand in one of his four. Behind them, the palace glowed with warm light, and ahead lay the work of rebuilding an empire built on trust instead of fear. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in either of their lives, it felt possible. The galaxy was about to change, one relationship at a time.